Paulogia, and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. If you're new to the channel, why not take a minute and tap on the subscribe button so that you can be notified when there are new science, theology, or news videos each week.
Hi, and welcome to Answers News. I'm Avery Foley, and I'm here with Dr. Gabriella Haynes and Bodie Hodge.
Hi, guys.
It's been over a month since Ken has been on, and I've been waiting for him to address his latest scandal. It has it all. Dinosaur bones, a congressman, financial cover-ups, and creationists screwing over other creationists. I'll tell you about it at the end, but since we're stuck without ham, let's scramble a few eggs.
In the U.S., the decline of Christianity continues at rapid pace. An update on America's changing religious landscape. So this is a new study from the very respected research group, the Pew Research Center, looking at sort of the attitudes of Americans towards religion over the last decade. So comparing the current attitudes in 2019 to those in 2009, and they found that just within those 10 years, they've seen, now, 65% of Americans describe themselves as Christians, as opposed to just a decade ago when that was up 12%, 77% instead of just 65%. So a big drop. And at the same time, there's been a big increase in those who identify as atheists, agnostics, or where they say their religion is nothing in particular. And that's gone up from 17% just a decade ago to 26%.
That breaks down to 4% self-identifying as atheists, 5% self-identifying as agnostics, and 17% as nothing in particular, adding up to the 26% some call the nuns group. Note that at 26%, the nuns have passed the Catholics, who have slid to just 20%.
So
I would suggest this decline isn't just the United States. I would suggest we're seeing this in Canada and a lot of parts of the Western world as well.
Oh, yeah.
The most recent national poll in Canada was 2011, but the nuns are certainly on an upward trend here, 12.6% in 1991 and 23.9% in 2011. Canada seems to be ahead of where the US appears to be going. This map, also from Pew Research, isn't exactly the same, but does show that most of the Northern Hemisphere is cool on the importance of religion in their lives, where they're hot on religion in the Southern Hemisphere. Well, except for Ken's home continent of Australia.
Ha ha ha, suck on that, Ken.
They go back all the way back to the time of the silent generation, the people pre-World War II. Then you move forward, you got the baby boomers and so forth. And you start off in the 80s, and then the 70s, 60s, and now we're seeing this drop. We've been seeing a decline.
Only half of millennials identify as Christians now.
Right, yeah. And that's,
Good job, 51% of millennials.
what started to happen as of, say, 1925? There was the Scopes trial. For those who don't remember the Scopes trial, well, you're younger than
I wasn't there in 1925.
But the Scopes trial was a significant event. It was basically evolution was on trial. Evolution and creation was. And the creationists won the trial, but what it did is it gave evolution a platform to be in state schools from that moment forward. And that's what we saw. We saw it.
Uh-oh, Bodie. You're supposed to be the one on the panel pointing out fallacies, not the one making them. This is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Correlation is not causation. To demonstrate, here are a few examples from a Spurious Correlation website. Number of people who drowned by falling into a pool correlates to films Nicolas Cage appeared in. Letters in the winning word of the National Spelling Bee correlates to the number of people killed by venomous spiders. People who drowned falling out of a fishing boat correlates to the marriage rate in Kentucky. I mean, if we want to be really spurious, we could compare this world map of education levels with the world map we showed earlier of importance of religiosity. Correlation or causation? Though perhaps Answers in Genesis would affirm causation, as part of their general war on education.
If you think about that, for generations now, we've had whole kids taught for 16,000 hours in state schools this evolutionary worldview, and we wonder why the church is declining and that's gaining. According
to this 2007 paper, teachers devoted an average of 13.7 hours to general evolutionary processes, including human evolution, with 59% allocating between 3 and 15 hours of class time. A study says 15 hours are spent on evolution. Bodie says 16,000 hours are spent on evolution.
The idea of this whole religion of nothing in particular that people describe. And it's really just this buffet idea where people pick, I like this part of Christianity, I like this part of Buddhism, and I kind of like this New Age stuff, and astrology kind of interests me.
It's true. One who rejects organized religion does not necessarily have a more rational or more evidence-based position. Even in the 9% who self-identify as atheists or agnostics, that tells you only about their position on the God proposition. Everything else, including the supernatural, is open for variance.
And it ties into our postmodern thinking of nothing's really true, it's just true for me.
Unfortunately, the English language is rather imprecise, and usages and definitions of words can be very fluid from person to person and even sentence to sentence. This is why it's important to clarify definitions when talking about big topics like this. For me, truth is the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality. This makes reality the arbiter of truth rather than the individual. That a life-sized interpretation of the ark described in the Bible exists in Kentucky, for example, is something that can be evaluated without reference to any given person. When I've encountered "things are just true for me" claims, I've discovered that the person usually means the type of choices that they anticipate will lead them to their desired outcome. Since each person's desired outcome can vary, and since we can't know perfectly which actions will ultimately produce said outcome, this definition of truth is necessarily subjective, and probably unhelpful for the purpose of comparing philosophies.
So I get my own religion that fits how I view the world and how I want things to work, as opposed to looking to the truth of God's
when people
word.
argue-
From an outsider perspective, the practical implementation of Christianity we observe has every appearance of adherents picking and choosing the things they like and don't like from the Bible. There are thousands of denominations, each with differing views and emphasis, and each insisting they're not just making things fit how they see the world.
But yeah, that's part of the secular religions. The secular religions are dominating our school systems throughout the Western world.
At the risk of being pedantic, secular religion is a paradoxal phrase, like square circle or married bachelor. Secular isn't a word that stands on its own. Its definitions are some form of not religious. For example, denoting attitudes, activities, or other things that have no religious or spiritual basis. Secular religion would mean non-religious religion, like dry wetness, or cold heat, or tall shortness. This makes no sense.
It mentions that that Christians have declined as an overall share of the U.S. population, so the percentage compared to the American population is down. But when they only looked at Christians who identify not just as Protestants, but as born-again or evangelical Protestants, they found that that number is as high or higher, slightly higher, than it was back in 2009.
This isn't quite accurate. As a percentage of the total population, evangelicals are down, just like all Christian subgroups. What Avery saw here was that evangelicals are up as a percentage of total Protestants. So evangelicals are shrinking at a slower rate than the other Protestant denominations.
But it just hasn't kept up with the growth of the U.S. population.
So
Obviously,
you're
there's more
telling me
people
people
than
who
there were.
believe the Bible and churches that follow the Bible, they're actually growing?
Still, yeah.
They're not growing, they're just shrinking at a slower rate.
And that's a good segue into our next article, which is Christianity Booming, Atheism Declining Around the World, report says. Their best estimates have found that Christianity has increased exponentially, particularly in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
Mm-hmm. You know, this article also pointed out that atheists and agnosticism is actually on the decline worldwide. So even though we're seeing an increase here in the United States and parts of the Western world, it is declining overall.
All right. So the article in question has pulled its stats from somewhere called the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And here's the raw data. I'm less interested in the growth of Christianity in the non-Western world, and more curious about this projected global decline in the nones. So the non-religious grows from 1900 to 1970, growing in 2000, growing in 2019, and the projection for 2025, shrinking. Wait, why shrinking when the trend is upward, and shrinking even more in 2050? The methodology section lends no insights as to how these extrapolations are made. The article compares growth rates favorably and unfavorably to general population growth rate, so it may have to do with that. But even so, an increasing rate should still lead to an increasing absolute number, even if that number is a smaller percentage of the overall population. The article also points out that atheism held roughly steady from 2000 to 2019, but plummeted from 165 million in 1970 to 138 million in 2000. That's a massive drop for a stat that all other reports hold relatively steady over time, that I have to wonder if it's an outlier. This report pulls from many sources, and I'm wondering if perhaps this 1970 number was a differently phrased question, maybe a different definition of atheist? If anyone knows, please let me know in the comment section. In any case, since I can't find the methodology here, further analysis on my part would be just speculation. I don't doubt that the religious are having more kids per capita than the non-religious, but given how many of those kids are still leaving their faith, it will be an interesting trend to watch for the next few decades.
Ending religion is a bad idea, says Richard Dawkins. So not necessarily someone who you would think of as saying that ending religion is bad, since he's an atheist who has worked and written tons of books about how God does not exist and why we need to get rid of God and we need to get rid of religion.
At least they're not painting Dawkins as some kind of pope of atheism, or authority that speaks on behalf of all atheists. There's no atheist who is beholden or obligated or necessarily even inclined to share a position with any other atheist merely because they wrote some books, did some debates, or made some videos. In the case of Dawkins, while I learned much from his books on his primary field of biology, I've been disagreeing with more and more of his non-biology statements over the years.
But he says it might actually be a bad idea because it would, quote, give people a license to do really bad things.
This reminds me of the time Eric Hovind was on Ray Comfort's show, and they discussed their own morals.
If you were not a Christian, would that let you just do anything you want to do? I said, absolutely. I would live my life with absolutely no restraints at all. I would do whatever I want. And that's where you guys get lots of testimonies.
I'd be in jail if I wasn't a Christian.
Eric and Ray think that without God, they would be in jail for serious crimes. While I firmly believe that the world would be better off without religion, we presently live in a world with religion, and some have bound up their worldview so tightly in it that to tear it away might cause those individuals some existential problems. Purely anecdotally, those I've met who left the faith tend to spend more time considering the morality and consequences of their actions than they did when they were religious. But your mileage may vary.
And this comes out of some work that one of his students did, where if there was something out for you to take that you were supposed to pay for, you wouldn't, and if there was a surveillance camera, you knew somebody was watching, you'd be more likely to pay. And it really struck me as amazing, because here's a man who espouses a worldview, and he's called the God of the Bible some very terrible names.
Yes.
And says that Christians are delusional and it's child abuse to train your children to believe in the Bible. But he wants to borrow some of that morality because it makes life better.
Dawkins doesn't want to borrow morality like a cup of sugar. Morality is the evaluation of how well a given action will achieve desired outcomes, generally to minimize suffering and maximize pleasure. In this case, the pleasure of free coffee causes harm to the provider of the coffee. Nothing about the morality of this situation is being borrowed from the Bible. One popular test for the morality of an action is to ask oneself if you'd like to live in a world where everyone behaved in a given way. In a world where no one paid for coffee, there would be no coffee, because the providers couldn't afford to do it. Even so, on an individual basis, the personal pleasure of free coffee and the perceived harm done by taking coffee is closer to a tie on average. So little differences are bound to change the scale. People tend to want to be perceived as good. Putting the needs of the tribe ahead of the needs of oneself is a long-term survival advantage in social species and is therefore rewarded. So making the theft less anonymous will tip the scales towards compliance. While Santa Claus may be a close second, the Christian God is the ultimate manifestation of an ever-present conscience who sees everything done in secret, particularly combined with ultimate rewards and ultimate punishments. If you can get a person to buy in, this is clearly an effective enforcement system for tipping someone's personal benefit versus group harm scale. Dawkins' quote indicates that he's praising a particular enforcement system, not the underpinning morality. Personally, I don't agree with this utilitarian view of religion. That something had historical social value doesn't mean it's the best way to move forward. For any areas of social utility that religion can provide, there are secular equivalents, without the social costs of false ideas, poor epistemology, and harmful ideologies.
There are atheists that act really good, that do good things. I'm not arguing that. Here's the thing. You don't have a foundation for, first of all, defining what is good, and secondly, for acting good.
Good is the spectrum of activities that are most helpful in reaching our moral objectives. No further foundation is needed.
I mean, you don't really have, you're doing it, but you don't have a foundation or a basis.
You're borrowing from a Christian worldview in order to...
Right.
Because the moral objective Christians profess to is to please God, then for a Christian, good is the range of actions that they interpret will most please God.
Because what is good? How do you define good in a naturalistic worldview?
Like it or not, humans are animals. By the very definition of pleasure, we desire what gives us pleasure. Both short-term pleasures as well as longer-term thriving. Equally by definition, we want to minimize pain, short-term and long-term. And because we are a social species, we understand that increasing the prosperity of the tribe is an effective way to also increase personal prosperity. Even though most people will never attempt to verbalize it, we are the beneficiaries of the survival advantages of maximizing well-being of the tribe and descendants of those who passed along these selected traits. For most, good is the spectrum of actions that maximize well-being of the tribe. However broadly or narrowly one defines tribe. This is explained fully and completely by biological imperative. No further grounding is needed.
You have to have a foundation or a basis to know what is good and what is bad.
Here's the thing. Most Christians actually default to a naturalistic worldview. Anytime a Christian feels like encouraging people to love whomever they love is better than restricting such expression, they're borrowing from a naturalistic morality. When they decide that wearing mixed fabrics is okay because it doesn't hurt anyone, they borrow from a naturalistic morality. When they make excuses that Bible slavery wasn't really that bad, they're attempting to ground things in a naturalistic morality. It's only the activities where Bible morality happens to overlap with naturalistic morality, theft, murder, and a few others, that seem to unite people. So, Georgia, what's the real foundation here?
So, and he's not saying that people should all of a sudden be Christians or people should believe in God. He's just saying it works to help control the masses, basically. It works to help control people's behavior. So maybe it's good that people do believe in that so we have a better society.
Here's what Dawkins had to say. Whether irrational or not, it does unfortunately seem plausible that, if someone sincerely believes God is watching his every move, he might be more likely to be good. I must say I hate that idea, he added. I want to believe humans are better than that. I'd like to believe I'm honest whether anyone is watching or not. I'm with Dawkins. The idea that a God belief has utility in ethics compliance is distasteful. Where we differ is his concession that this particular marginal improvement outweighs the negative effects that religion has globally, nationally, and in the lives of individuals. Or even a concession that any level of utility makes it worthwhile keeping ideologies that are based on a false premise. Life progressed for millions of years without religion. There's no reason we can't shed this temporary 10,000-year moral crutch and be all the stronger for it.
Well, we are out of time for today, so any of the articles that we didn't cover, we will cover on Monday.
Well, I've been waiting for the Answers in Genesis crew to cover this story from the New Yorker. Mark Meadows and the Undisclosed Dinosaur Property. A fight among fossil hunters, a dubious documentary, and the conservative congressman from North Carolina. I know it's near impossible to keep track of politicians failing to live up to the letter of the law when it comes to contributions, filings, or ethics, which is strange because so many US politicians believe that a God is watching them 24/7. It's almost like such a belief doesn't actually ensure moral behavior. But I digress. The New Yorker discovered that North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows sold a 134-acre property in Dinosaur, Colorado for $200,000. And that this sale and the payments for it were not included on Meadows' congressional financial disclosures. Just another day in Washington. But what caught my eye was that the purchaser of the land was Answers in Genesis, the creation ministry run by Ken Ham. What in the world is Answers in Genesis planning to do with 134 acres of land in Dinosaur, Colorado? Turns out that this particular plot of land has been a particularly fruitful spot for paleontologists to find dinosaur fossils. Of greatest note, a near-complete Allosaurus skeleton, the one that currently resides in Ken Ham's Creation Museum in Kentucky. Easily the coolest thing in the entire museum. Impressive no matter how old you think the Earth is. But I had no idea about the colorful history behind the specimen. In the summer of 2002, a press release announced, Homeschool Expedition uncovers rare Allosaur and giant sauropod. The very Allosaur, now in AiG's Creation Museum, had been found on a Creation Ministry expedition by 9-year-old homeschooler Haley Meadows, daughter of Congressman Mark Meadows. This announcement was followed by a documentary called Raising the Allosaur, the true story of a rare dinosaur and the homeschoolers who found it, in which Congressman Meadows appears frequently.
Mark, I understand that we found a little something here.
We did.
Tell me what happened.
Well, my daughter Haley and I, we were working towards the end of the day here, just trying to get one last bit of rock out before we finished. And so she was back digging, and we were taking the brush and trying to take some of the sand out, and all of a sudden we spotted a little bit of bone, we thought, and we found a claw.
According to the New Yorker, by the time the film was released, however, the claim that the homeschoolers had found the dinosaur had become the subject of an acrimonious dispute in the world of creationist fossil hunting. According to multiple accounts, the bones were not discovered during the Dragon's Den dig. They were found in the fall of 2000 by the man who then owned the property, a local school teacher named Dana Forbes, and they were mostly excavated several months later by a team that was led by a young Earth creationist and fossil hunter named Joe Taylor. This led to years of legal disputes about the ownership of the fossil, pitting young Earth creationists against young Earth creationists, devolving into broken leases, hundreds of thousands in fines, broken non-disparagement orders, a sex scandal with a barely legal nanny, and general unchristlike behavior on behalf of everyone involved. I'd encourage you to read the article if you want the sordid details. But after the dust settled, Congressman Meadows bought the land, AiG ended up with the skeleton, And now AiG owns the land as well. And what are Ken's plans for this land? AiG said in an email that they're considering a few uses for the property, but the New Yorker shares one probable motive. Among the handful of countries where the vast majority of dinosaur fossils have been discovered, the United States is the only one where such bones, when found on private property, belong to the landowner rather than to the government. It is this legal structure that allows creationists to dig dinosaurs and pretend to be paleontologists. By keeping the land in the hands of young Earth creationists, Meadows would ensure that they could tell the story of any fossils found there. So, sometime in the future, the residents of Colorado can possibly look forward to a slick AiG-branded homeschool dinosaur digs, where the nature of any finds can be kept out of the hands of secular paleontologists and interpreted for the world specifically through Ken's lens of the most literalistic take on scripture. There's nothing anyone can do about this. But if you're living in creationist Mark Meadows' congressional district, you've got some serious voting to do. Anyhow, maybe we'll see this covered in a future Answers news, but I've stopped holding my breath and wanted to share it with you all. Thanks for watching. A huge thank you to all my patrons who make the work of this channel possible. I'd love to be able to dedicate even more of my time to Paulogia, so if you're willing and able, please see the links in the description for various ways you can help. Before you go, here's another video you might want to click on. Until next time, later.